Whereas I feel like nonprofits, it's like the home of the jack of all trades. So it's like you're just doing everything. And I think that's where the burnout happens and that's where the overwhelm happens because for-profit companies have the budget to have specialists. Whereas nonprofits, you just have to find people who can do it all, or at least try to.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mark Vanderpool, and today I'm excited to introduce you to my new friend, Nathalie Huynh. Nathalie is the head of marketing at the Pacific Asian Consortium for Employment in Los Angeles, California. She's an experienced marketing leader who's been in the for-profit and nonprofit sector for many years, and she has some fantastic insights to share with you. We talk at depth about the differences between nonprofit marketing and nonprofit branding, and really how you can start to leverage effective marketing and effective branding to grow your nonprofit starting today. She is a fantastic communicator, a great leader, and she has wonderful advice for you to leverage as you move forward. Hope you enjoy the conversation with Nathalie. Nathalie Huynh, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, we have a very fun conversation planned around the difference in nonprofit marketing and branding. But before we go there, let's talk a little bit about who you are. You work for a wonderful nonprofit in Los Angeles. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and then why you decided to go down this path of working in the nonprofit space?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently based in LA. I'm the marketing and communications manager at Pacific Asian Consortium in Employment, or PACE. And the reason I decided to go into the nonprofit sector is actually I'm only 2 years deep into my nonprofit marketing journey. And before that, I worked in the for-profit sector. And I think it kind of came to a point where I was like, what do I want the meaning of my life to be? And when I thought about the difference between the for-profit sector and the nonprofit sector, I realized, okay, the for-profit sector exists to create revenue for shareholders and owners of companies, whereas nonprofits exist to make a difference in the world. And I knew I had marketing skills that I could apply to the nonprofit sector. And I thought, okay, if I'm already passionate about marketing, why don't I do it towards something meaningful and towards something that could really change the world? Instead of making rich people richer, why don't I help the communities around me? So when I first came into the nonprofit sector, it was a huge learning curve. And I feel like I had misconceptions that I had to unlearn. And it's been a great journey kind of exploring the differences between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector, but also how they're similar as well. Because when I first came into the nonprofit sector, I had this kind of misconception that, investing in marketing and branding, that's like a for-profit thing. Nonprofits have more important work to do. They don't have time to talk about their branding or their marketing. They have more important things to do, like saving the world. But actually, I would argue that marketing and branding is just as important, if not more important, for nonprofits as they are for for-profits. So I think that kind of outlines my journey in the last 2 years of kind of transitioning from the for-profit sector to the nonprofit sector. And in terms of my marketing experience, it's varied across a lot of different sectors. I've worked in media, music, I've owned a bakery, I've worked in the finance sector. So I've been a bit all over the place. And I think just that diversity of experience has really allowed me to see that no matter what industry or sector you're in, I feel like the core principles of branding and marketing can be applied to, different sectors. And you just have to, stick to your guns and believe in that.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I've got to ask about the bakery. I didn't know this about you, Nathalie. This is great. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I've always loved baking as like a hobby. So it first started off as like a baking YouTube channel, and I will not say the name because I don't want people to find those videos, but it started off as a YouTube channel, and then I just started baking for friends and family, and people just really loved it. So I actually ran a bakery during the COVID era, and I ran that bakery for about 2 years.
Wow.
And I specialized in sourdough bread and croissants. So if you ever want to have a separate convo about croissants and pastries and baking, then we can do another podcast for that.
That's fantastic. I think I would be better on the consumption side than the creation side, of course, of that. But I would love to have another conversation. That's awesome. So I, like you, am a huge fan of effective marketing and effective branding. It's definitely not that wasn't where I began my journey. I began my journey more on the operations side, and then into more of the fundraising side, when sales and fundraising, like those two sides there. I too had a lot of misconceptions about branding, right? I was one of those believers that branding, we're going back many years here, but like branding was a lot more to do with logos and a lot more to do with the name of the company or the name of the nonprofit, in that it was a very effective way of wasting a lot of money, is what my perception of branding was. And I completely disagree with that today. So I want to be totally clear. That is a belief. If we go back 7, 10-ish years at this point, I do not believe that at all. And so I think
Mhm.
it's important for people to differentiate, because a lot of folks view them as one and the same. I know
Yeah.
a lot of business owners and a lot of nonprofit leaders that hate marketing as much as they hate branding. They think, oh, marketing is just a great way to waste money. And it's easy to spend a lot of money on marketing, right? That's an easy thing to do. It's easy to
Yes,
fast taste,
definitely.
right? Like it's really easy to spend money on Facebook ads and for it not to work. We all know that. So let's set the record straight. Let's with some definitions, with some
Mhm.
Nathalie Huynh definitions.
Okay, got
Marketing versus branding.
Okay, so I'm really glad that you asked that. And also, it's hilarious that you called them such an effective way to waste money, because I feel like I used to have that perception as well.
Right.
So I would say the main difference between marketing and branding is that branding is the why.
Hmm.
It's who you are, it's your value. So branding is the why you exist, and marketing is the how. It's
Mhm.
the tools and communication strategies you use to communicate that value. So, for example, if branding creates value, marketing extracts and spreads that value.
We're just going to call a quick timeout on that. That is so well said.
Oh,
Please say
thank
that
you.
please say that one more time.
Yeah. So if branding is the why, then marketing is the how. So branding creates value. It creates the identity of your company or org, and marketing as the how it communicates and extracts that value.
I
It's the
love the way.
tools and the strategies you use to communicate your value.
So I think it's a fabulous definition, but I think it's very helpful for people to put branding in the same conversation as growth strategy, right?
Mhm.
That's a part of a growth strategy session. It's not your font, right? Does your
Yeah.
font matter? Yes, your font absolutely matters. It absolutely matters. It's important.
Mhm.
But branding is a strategic time. Like excellent branding, like people that are fabulous at branding are great at growing companies. And so they're great at growing nonprofits. So if you hear me use those terms interchangeably, company and nonprofit, it's a
Mhm.
part of the strategy session. It's a part of who are we? How are we going to grow? How are we going to make the world a better place?
Yes.
The logos, the fonts, the names, that's all downstream. It's really important, but it's downstream. Would you agree with that?
No, I would 100% agree with that. And that's what I tell people a lot. And I feel like I talk people's ears off, but I feel like this is really true. Because branding, okay, if you take a simple definition of branding, let's say branding is the overall identity of your company or org. That's just a very basic definition, right? And every marketer will have a different opinion on what elements make up a brand
Yes.
and which elements are the most essential.
Right.
So branding can be made of many different elements. And this is something I sort of came up with to apply to the nonprofit sector to keep things as simple as possible. I think the nonprofit sector, the three core elements of a nonprofit brand is one, your mission, your values, and your theory of change, aka your impact and how you're going to create that impact.
Right.
And visual identity can be a fourth element of branding. And
Mhm.
while important, you're right, it does not take precedence over those three core elements I just described, which is your mission, your values, and your theory of change. And as a nonprofit, if you can nail down those three core elements of your brand first, the visual identity can come later. You can work with a graphic designer to create a cute color scheme and a really nice logo, find you a font that really captures your org. But if you don't know those three core elements of your brand, why you exist in the world, your mission, your values, and your theory of change, everything from then on will be so difficult. Your marketing strategies will not be as effective as they could be, and your fundraising will not be as effective as it could be. And when I say nail down your brand, I mean you really need to nail down those three core elements on any given day. You can walk up to anyone at your org, at any level of your org, and ask them to recite those three core elements of your brand, and they should be able to say it like right off the bat, like just on the spot, like that. And a good way to test this is go up to people at your nonprofit at different levels and parts of your nonprofit. Ask them what they think the mission is, ask them what they think the values are. And if everyone has a different answer, then you know there's something you got to work on there.
Mm.
It needs to be top to bottom cohesion on
Right.
what those three core elements are. And I think if you just boil it down to nailing down those three and having the visual identity come later, you're setting yourself off to a great start in establishing a strong brand.
I could not agree with that anymore, right? I'm 100% aligned with you on that. Maybe at some point we'll find something that we disagree with, but I have to completely on this because this is what we focus on so heavily during our strategy sessions, right? We focus on the theory of change. We focus on the growth strategy. It has to do with these mission, vision, values that you're talking about. I love the way you're putting this, though. It's a great frame around the conversation because you'll hear people that say, oh, you need to be able to go to anyone in your organization and say, hey, what's our elevator pitch? What's our one-liner? Right? And that's a good thing to know. Right? But you just went to, if that's 101, you just took it to 401, like immediately. Right? And that's so powerful. And I just want to go back to that fantastic, definition that you put together where branding is how we create value. You just outlined the entire value proposition of a nonprofit. This is who we serve. This is why we serve them. This is how we serve them. This is the vision of the world that we're trying to create with our funders, with all of our stakeholders.
Yes.
That's the whole thing, right?
Exactly. And if you don't have that, how are you going to convince people to give you money to keep your org going? How can you communicate, find strong messaging for your marketing campaigns? Because people think with nonprofits, we just have to jump straight to the fundraising part, straight to the grants part, straight to the part where let's make money. But it really is worth taking the time to step back and think, okay, are we all in alignment on what our brand actually is, on who we want to be in the world and how we want to make that change?
Right.
And you'll see that sometimes you don't have alignment on that, and that's okay. And you can work on that.
Those are those golden opportunities, right? We have different opinions. It might be a large organization, right? So we have a lot of different layers to work through. But let's talk about marketing fluff, right? Because I feel like it's really easy to get into like the platitudes and this really fluffy language. I feel like you're very dialed in when it comes to like it needs to be practical. It needs to be easy to understand. Is that fair?
Yes, I am that way now, and I wasn't always that way, and I'm very open to owning up to that.
We all learn and grow, Natalie. We're all here to learn and grow. That's good. Talk about it though, if you don't mind.
Sure. So I think I mentioned this earlier where I talked about the difference between like my experience in for-profit versus nonprofit. And typically at a for-profit company, you do have more money to blow.
Right.
Let's say, you have larger budgets to run ads and to try different things. And it's so easy to get caught up in all the fluff and the marketing jargon and trying things because you have the budget in order to do extra things that might not be needed. And I think working in the nonprofit sector really had me create this mindset of honing in on what is actually practical, what you have the capacity to do, and what's within budget.
Right.
So I think within the nonprofit sector, I would say like nonprofit marketers and development teams, like we're stretched so thin. We have so much to do. And everyone in the nonprofit sector is really busy. But I guess I'm speaking from my experience being a nonprofit marketer on a development team. Like you are stretched so thin and you have so much to do that you cannot possibly do it all. So it's about paring things down and strategizing what works best for your org and what your goals are and what channels work best for you. And if you don't have the capacity to maintain a certain channel, then that's fine. Work on the channels that you do have the capacity to maintain. And once you've perfected that, then you can start trying new things.
Yes. 100%. I mean, it's just, you have to cut it. You have to say, we can't do it right now. It's gone. It's out. Bye-bye. And that's a hard thing to do. That's a really hard thing for me to do. right?
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
a
It's
hard
a
thing.
hard thing for anyone to do. And I think when I first entered the nonprofit sector, I was on every webinar possible. You know, the whole webinar scene in the nonprofit space, everyone's hosting webinars about everything. And I was so overwhelmed at first. I watched all these webinars. I learned as much as I could about the nonprofit sector. And as a nonprofit um, marketer, I felt the need like, oh my God, we have to do it all. I have to do peer to peer. I have to do the golf fundraiser. I
Right.
have to do the 5K. I have to run a newsletter. I have to manage all the socials. I have to create a brand guide. I have to keep our marketing going. I have to upkeep our website. I have to run the blog on the website. I have to do everything. And I just felt this pressure like, oh my gosh, like I have to do all of this. And I have to do the Giving Tuesday. Like we just came out of end of year giving and Giving Tuesday. I feel like Giving Tuesday is the biggest source of anxiety for nonprofit marketers ever because everyone makes you feel like you have to participate or you're missing out. And Giving Tuesday is the right thing for every org, but actually it's not.
Right.
If you don't already have a strong mailing list set up and you don't have, let's say, a mailing system to like thank funders and nurture funders after they've donated to you, if you don't have a strong communication strategy in place, then you might not see the results from Giving Tuesday that you think everyone else has, and then you might think you're a failure. But
Hmm.
that's not it. Like, you don't have to be on every channel and jump on every opportunity or every bandwagon. Pick
Yes.
the channels that you have the capacity to support and do well. Pick the channels where your people already are, where your audience already is, where your stakeholders already are. And if that means dropping 2 social media platforms, if that means giving up the Facebook page in order to invest more in your newsletter, then that's fine. But don't feel the pressure to do every type of event, every type of marketing, everything, because that's just unrealistic. And at the end of the day, you are a human being. You're not a content generating machine. So just take it easy. Like, it's fine. Um, yeah, so that's something I definitely had to learn because I would say like the first 6 months to a year of my like nonprofit marketing journey was like a hot mess. Not a hot mess, but overwhelming, I guess.
Overwhelming them. So there's so much that we're going to unpack with that, Natalie, and I just love your perspective on it. So, what was the largest company you worked for prior to working with Pace?
The largest company that I worked for, I would say in terms of size, I would say Pace is the largest company
Okay,
I've
good
worked
deal.
for in terms
Good
of
deal.
size.
Okay, that's awesome. So, just thinking about the difference with marketing budgets and how that marketing can be spent. Like,
Hmm.
let me be clear. Like the prevailing teaching for marketing for whether it's nonprofits or businesses is simply not good. And I think it's important to like address because everything that you were talking about before, like the advice is do more everywhere, right? You need to be on every platform. You need to be omni-channel. Are you running Google ads? Well, are you running Facebook ads? Well, are you writing grants? All the things that you talked about. What's your Giving Tuesday strategy? Right? That is so much work. Doing any of those things well is so much work.
Yes.
It's not like some work. It's so much work. And unless somebody has sat in a marketing seat, in a development seat, and like 24/7, that's what they do, it's really easy to misunderstand. Well, you're just posting on Facebook. Like, what's the big deal? Right. But until you've lived that world, you understand, like, wow, if I'm going to do this well, it's going to require a ton of resources. And so, like,
Yes.
big company marketing spend versus even large nonprofit marketing spend are two
Hmm.
completely different worlds, totally different worlds. Because big companies aren't always evaluated on what's your administrative cost. How much money are you spending on admin? Where nonprofits are scrutinized left and right, and I don't think it's appropriate for them to be scrutinized on admin. But
Yeah.
it's just really tough.
I agree. And I feel like another difference to that between the for profit, like my experience in for profit marketing, is that you have the capacity to have a person for each thing. You have a social media person dedicated only to social media. You have a content marketing person dedicated to just content marketing. You have an email and SEO person dedicated to each thing. Whereas I feel like nonprofits, it's like the home of the jack of all trades,
Right.
you know? So it's like you're just doing everything. And I think that's where the burnout happens and that's where the overwhelm happens because for profit companies have the budget to have specialists, whereas nonprofits, you just have to find people who can do it all, or at least try to.
And then you said something so great that we've got to zoom in on. It's you've got to know where your people are.
Yes.
That is so vital. And like this is something that we take so seriously during our growth strategy sessions where we're building out who's your ideal donor, your marketing channel analysis. Like, so where are they? And now let's go build a plan to get more of them. If we don't know where our people are, that's where marketing becomes a waste, right? Because if we think that it's so easy to pick on TikTok, and so I'm just going to pick on TikTok from because it's the latest thing we can pick on
Yeah.
voice, you know. But it's, oh man, TikTok's blowing up right now. We've got to invest on it. Like, have you seen how many monthly active users there are on TikTok? Why aren't we spending money on TikTok? Why aren't we posting there? Because our donors aren't there, right? If our donors were on TikTok and that was our primary channel, it would be worthwhile. But if they're not, it's okay to ignore it.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember the advice. This was all because of Zuckerberg and Instagram and everything that they put together back in 2008, 2010. All of it was, if you're not omni-channel, it's embarrassing. Like, we should be embarrassed if our nonprofit isn't posting on every platform. And it's like,
And
what a
that's a
terrible,
load of baloney.
what
That
a
is so
lie,
not true.
right?
That's such a lie.
It's brutal, right? I mean, it's a
It is.
terrible advice.
For example, if you are like, let's say a nonprofit doing small business like development services or something, you don't need to be on TikTok. Your people are on, LinkedIn.
Right,
And
right.
if you're an animal shelter or more of like a youth-facing org, then obviously you need to be on like TikTok because that's where all the funny animal videos are and the user-generated content and the youth are. So it's really just knowing where your people are and then um, putting resources towards that because people think when you do social media, you make one post and that can go on all the platforms. And
Right.
that's actually not the case. For every social media post you create, if you want it to be effective, you kind of have to make different versions of it for each platform. And that takes a lot of time. So I think even not just putting social media under one like umbrella because it's every platform on social media even is so different and could even use its own team just for one social media platform.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I feel like that's a big misconception.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something that you and I talked about before. I think this is so important that when we talk about, what is the product for a nonprofit? From the funder's perspective, you have this great phrase. It's the mission is the product.
Yes, the
Want to
mission
talk about
is yeah. Um, so I think I definitely say that like the mission is the product, and I think I thought about that statement because again I was trying to think what the product is for a for-profit company. So for-profit companies are selling goods and services. Whereas for nonprofits, your customer is not receiving anything like a physical actual item or a good or service. They're receiving your mission. They're receiving your values.
that? Hmm.
So, and I just thought of this crazy thing. Like, for example, for-profit companies, it's actually a crazy thing when through um, marketing, you're able to persuade another human being to give you their money in exchange for a good or a service you provide.
Right.
That's crazy. And that's actually not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And then that challenge is amplified by a nonprofit because you're asking another human being to give you their money, not for something you're giving them, but to help someone else.
It's so hard.
And that is so hard. Nonprofits are actually up against a lot and they don't realize how mind blowing it is that is. That's crazy.
Right.
So your product is your mission because you're selling the change that you're making in the world to someone and you have to make that convincing enough for them to give you their money or their time or their services or their goods to help someone else. So if I'm saying that a nonprofit brand is made out of the three core elements, which is your mission, your values, and your theory of change. So if the mission is the product, your brand is the product. You're selling your brand to funders, to the community. You're selling who you are. And if you communicate it correctly, then they will sustain your organization in return. They
Mhm.
will buy into that. So if your mission is the product, can you really afford not to invest in your brand?
I love the way you're saying that. We state it slightly differently, but I think they're both very much aligned. We always
Hmm.
ask, so what does your nonprofit sell? And we say you're selling social impact. It's the same, like we're saying the same thing. So we're just drilling down on the impact side because, you know, we've got a client right now that's trying to expand into new locations, right? So they're expanding into 40 countries and they're wanting to work with It's a maternal health program. And each location is going to hopefully add 1,000 new women every year. So they're wanting to get 4,000 new women, 4 different countries in their program. And these are pregnant women going through a maternal health program.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're doing is we're building out the social return on investment by taking care of pregnant women in those respective countries. And you can quantify that. Like you can actually say, what is the social return on investment by providing care for these women? And so we're able to extrapolate that number, do the math, look at the research, do all that work, and then communicate that to funders and be like, this is what your gift is going to do. And you're putting a different, like you're looking at it from the marketing seat in a fabulous way. So like, this is what our product is. Our product is this impact. Our product is the feelings, the associations, the missions, the vision, all of that we're putting together in this beautiful package of how we amplify and communicate the mission of our nonprofit.
I couldn't have said it any better. And I like the way that you view it from the impact side, because that's also just as important. I agree. Like we're saying the same thing, but just from like a different lens.
Right. And that's the challenge, right? Like the challenge is you have someone that's in development, you have someone who's in marketing, you have someone that's in ops. And that's why our logo, we've got these three circles. You can see that right there.
Oh yeah. Yeah. The three like interlocking circles.
Exactly.
Oh, that's what they represent.
That's what it represents. It's the ops,
Oh,
it's the
okay.
marketing, it's development, putting everything together. That's the impact that we're all trying to collectively create there. And it's tough because these perspectives are equally valid and they're
Mm-hmm.
all really important. But I really love your approach on this. I think it's very well put together.
Thank you.
It's awesome. That's really, really awesome. So when you look at, I think it's just helpful to get very tactical, nitty gritty, branding versus marketing. You have that fabulous definition. But when we've established who our brand is, that's when like the day-to-day work starts to begin. That's the marketing.
Yes.
We've talked about you've got to know your marketing channel. Maybe your channels, like if you're larger, like if you're doing more than $10, $20 million a year, it's okay to have multiple channels. Until then, you've got to have your channel, meaning you have to focus your resources. How do you look at the effectiveness of marketing? And let's just say from a development standpoint, from a fundraising specific standpoint, how do you like to look at that?
So I would evaluate the effectiveness of marketing just based on what stage your organization is at and what outcome you want to, I guess, achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a really tough question because it's so like specific per case. Like,
Yeah.
do you want to give me kind of an example or?
I think this is what's so fun is because, or I think this is why we both like marketing is because it's dynamic, right? It's not
Yeah,
just
it is.
cut and paste, kind of a thing. So let's just say you were at a point in your nonprofit growth career where you wanted to add a new channel.
Hmm.
How would you start to look at what do we need to be evaluating as we pursue this channel and how are we going to consider our efforts successful over the course of 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, so I would say, okay, I'm gonna make this more of a specific channel. So let's say your nonprofit's already active on the socials, because social media is free and those are, accessible platforms to be on. And let's say you want to start growing your mailing list.
Great. Let's do it.
So let's say you invest in an email service plat, plat, platform, like a mailing list, like newsletter platform, and I would just look up benchmarks within your in industry. So let's say for nonprofits of my size, what's the average mailing list size for nonprofits of my size, and how often do they send email communications? So
Right.
I think there's lots of like good data surrounding that, like benchmarks within your nonprofit in industry. So I would look up those benchmark numbers and use that as a reach goal. So let's say by the end of the year we want to have let's say 1,000 contacts in our mailing list, and then you identify the ways how you're going to get there. So let's say you're already on social media, then let's start plugging our newsletter on social media. Let's make a really fun welcome series in our newsletter and launch and announce that on social media, get people to sign up, maybe lean in more to the content marketing and create content perks that you can only get through your mailing list. So
Right.
let's say, oh, if you sign up to our mailing list, we'll email you this guide on XYZ. So it's about finding the goal you want to reach. Okay, let's say 1,000 new mailing list subscribers by the end of the year and avenues to get them there. So if you already have an audience on social media, direct them to your newsletter, direct them to your mailing list. So I think, yeah, establish benchmark numbers so you have a goal to reach and just find different avenues to get there. And I think if you're able to reach that number, great. But I think it's also effective if you learned something along the way. Let's
Mm,
say you tried to get on your mailing list and it was really difficult and you're like, man, maybe this isn't the channel, or man, maybe this is the channel, but I just need to try a different avenue. So then you go on your website and you invest in a like pop-up. So if a user has been on your website for more than 10 seconds, a pop-up will appear
right,
and be like, hey, please sign up to our newsletter. And then suddenly that's where you see the growth coming in from. So just because you fail one way doesn't mean it's not the right thing to
right.
pursue. You just have to try different options. So I feel like that's kind of a specific example, but yeah, that's how I would just kind of gauge the effectiveness of something, is establish a benchmark goal, a realistic benchmark goal, and find
Mhm.
different avenues to work towards it.
Love it. I think it's a great explanation. And I love the way you're saying you're not a failure. You just learned another way not to do this, and we might need to experiment. I mean, how many lead magnets, do organizations have to go through to find the right one? But once you have that lead magnet, I've seen successful nonprofits keep the same one for years
Hmm.
because they work. Right? That's not
Yeah.
because they're lazy; it's because they work. And so
What's
it's
that saying?
really
If it's not broke, don't fix it or something. Yeah.
right. But oftentimes it's broke and we need to fix it. But once you fix it, keep it for a long time, like you're saying. So I
Hmm.
think it's really, really important and super fantastic to put it that way. You've said so many things on this podcast that are super helpful, but there's even more I feel like we can tap into. When we're looking at just practical tips for nonprofit marketers, what would you say are just a few things that'll be really important to just keep top of mind as some really useful tips that you've seen?
Mm, I feel like I have a lot of tips. Okay, let's build off, what I said before when I said there's this big pressure in the nonprofit space to be everywhere, and you're not a content marketing machine, you're
Right.
a human being.
Right.
I really do believe that. Like, just learn to take it easy. Like, be forgiving with yourself, take it easy. Because to be honest, when I thought of this brought me a lot of peace in my mind,
Mm,
because you are thinking about your brand and your org and your work for like 8 hours a day.
right.
Your audience barely thinks about you at all. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but it's
It
true. They
is.
don't think about you at all. They're all worrying about their own stuff. So lean into that. It's okay. Take it easy. If you have to delay a campaign for a week, fine. If you have to skip that social media post because you're spread too thin, if you have to reuse a graphic or reuse a message, it's fine. Your audience probably won't notice, and they'll be very forgiving with you because, again, your audience barely thinks about you at all. And actually, repeating content is a good thing because it helps build brand awareness. So I guess building off that, another tip I would say is repeat yourself often, because
Mhm.
I say this a lot. I would say one really strong message shared 1,000 times is way better than 1,000 different messages shared once,
Mhm.
because it takes a while for your audience to build an association between what you're saying and your brand.
Right.
That's why politicians always repeat the same phrases all
Right.
the time. Once you find a couple core messages that work, stick with them and repeat them often. It's okay to repeat yourself. Your audience won't notice, and actually, it builds your brand by repeating yourself. And if you're scared of it getting boring, you can spice up the content. You can keep it fresh by experimenting with depth or form.
Mm,
So take the same one point and really zoom in and make an in-depth analysis, or zoom out and do a macro analysis, or experiment with form. Take one message and make a listicle, then turn it into a video, then turn it into a social media graphic, then turn it into, I don't know, a GIF or something. So that keeps you from having to constantly generate new messaging and new ideas, because that's exhausting. And I tried to do that for a long time. You just run out of things to say, and then the things you say are just not very good because you've said too many different things. Like, stick to core messages that work, and to figure out how they work, you can always do a B test. You can always ask a small sample size
mm,
audience. And I guess, okay, that is another tip too, is always look for feedback with fresh eyes, because when you're in the work, you can't see the work. And I think a good tip that I have is a gold mine of good marketing feedback I've gotten is from new hires. So
Mm,
people who have just been recently hired to your org, talk to them, ask them, okay, in the process, you were applying for this job, you were researching our org, you were looking through our annual report, through our website, through our social media, you were probably stalking us a little
mm,
bit. Like, what did you like?
mm.
What confused you? What was kind of weird? Like, what was your perspective on all this? And I think new hires have a great feedback on how you can improve your marketing and the outward like presentation of your org and be willing to, take that feedback on board. Um, yeah, those are just like a couple tips I have. Just like, I talk, it's so funny because I talk so much about how branding and marketing are so important and it's like the lifeblood of your org. But at the end of the day, it really also is like not that deep. Like the consequences of it are deep, but you don't have to spread yourself too thin to achieve that.
Right. You've said so many great things there, though. So I want to start at the top. You are
Okay.
so much closer to your messaging and branding than your donors or your stakeholders could ever imagine being, right? It's
Hmm.
so important. There's a good story that I read a number of years ago. It was Henry Ford. He was in the office and he was walking by the marketing department and they had their campaign just sort of emblazoned on the wall. They had a marketing campaign that they were rolling out. And Ford walked by that office every day for 8 months. And he just finally knocked on the door and he said, "When are y'all going to stop running this campaign? It's driving me crazy." And the CMO looked at him and said, "We haven't even launched that yet." And he was like, "Oh, like that's an upcoming campaign that they had been testing and iterating for months and months and months and months." And Ford got tired of it because he saw it every day, but not a single customer had ever seen it. And he was going to cancel the whole campaign because he was tired of it. This
Oh.
happens all the time with marketers, with nonprofit marketers, company, doesn't matter. Because we're so close. It's like, oh, I'm so tired of saying the same thing.
Hmm.
You haven't even begun to say it enough times yet, right?
Hmm.
I think it's what you just said. Assume that people don't know. Assume that people aren't thinking about you. I've heard it said other ways. Assume no one has any idea who you are, what you do, and they have a third grade reading level. I love those three
Exactly.
assumptions are so important. It's
I
important.
love that. I love that.
But just talk more about it because if we start saying too many things, we dilute the brand, right?
Exactly.
It's a terrible consequence.
Yes, brand dilution is definitely not what you want because, again, your brand is who you are and you can't be everything to everyone. And that
No,
applies in life, but that also applies to nonprofit
right,
marketing is that you can't be everything to everyone. Find your people, find your audience, find who you are, and stick with that. Because, again, there is this pressure to be everything everywhere all at once, and there's this pressure to be like a really strong grant writing org, but also have really strong
right,
individual fundraising, and you also have to have really strong corporate partnerships, and you also do all the marketing and this and that, and actually know like your audience isn't on every channel. You don't have to be everything to everyone,
right.
and
And
that
it's
really will simplify the work.
but it's also a huge disadvantage, right? When you
Mhm.
look at the data, and we have surveyed this data so many times, the organizations that grow are extremely focused. They are focused on one funder type and one channel. Those are the ones that grow. It's really easy to get too distracted. And there's a great phrase. We've been throwing lots of great phrases out there, but more organizations die of indigestion than they do starvation because we just keep
Mhm.
throwing all these different campaigns and all these different strategies, and it's just we get overwhelmed and we can't do anything because we have so much indigestion. It's so important to get, but everyone on the team to say the same things moving forward again and again and again. So important.
Yeah, and I think that is so important to get the whole team on board. And to be honest, that it might be one of the biggest struggles for nonprofits. Just to get everyone in agreement behind the same message can be so hard. And
Mhm.
it's almost like you have to do all the work to keep your org running that you almost don't want to just stop and pause and
Right,
take a step back to make sure you're all running in the same direction
right,
because there's always this fear of just continuing to exist and continuing to have to keep the org running that you're scared of just like stepping on the brakes to pause and make sure you're all working towards the same thing. But I promise it's worth it because without that consensus, again, none of your marketing and fundraising strategies will be as effective as they could be.
right. No, I'm completely with you on that. You have another great note here that I think is important to talk about is embracing emotion. Tell me about why you say that and where it's coming from.
To be honest, it's kind of a funny story because I read somewhere okay, so this man, he became a multimillionaire by selling like a pet rock. Like people were spending money on this pet rock. I forgot when that was that on sale in like the 70s or something,
Yeah,
like it hit the
70s and
market.
80s, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, what in the world? Like people are spending money on a pet rock.
Right.
Like, and I've always felt this way because humans at our core, we are not 100% logical human beings 100% of the time. Yet you get on the marketing side and you suddenly believe that everyone is 100% logical
Mhm.
consumer who will only make the 100% logical and strategic best choice for themselves every single time, so you try to market to that,
Right.
and that's just a lie, because if that was true, then no one would have ever bought a pet rock. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Let alone made a multimillionaire out of selling a pet rock. So I just think humans at our core, we don't make our buying decisions. We don't support brands all the time based on 100%, logic. There's like an emotional aspect to it. And I think nonprofits can really lean on that emotional aspects, because emotional resonance is such a huge part of nonprofit, marketing and branding. And I feel like that's also something that gives me peace, is because like not every brand asset and not every marketing campaign needs to be this 100% strategic thing.
Right.
Like you don't have to be like, oh, we use this color blue in our brand because it represents how chill we are, or like not everything needs to have like a logical, clear choice. Sometimes you're just going with it because it emotionally resonates and it's what your
Hmm.
audience emotionally responds to. And it's okay to lean into that emotional side of things.
Hmm.
Like
100%.
marketing is a science, but it's also not, I would say.
Right. And that's the challenge, right? I think sometimes we like to reduce it down to the science. And that's where a
Hmm.
lot of direct response comes from, right? The whole
Hmm.
direct response idea. And there's value to direct response. Like it's not a bad thing. But it's like, well, if I send 10,000 mailers, I'm going to get a 0.5% conversion rate and get however many new donors. Okay, well, they're trying to reduce it down. And that's good. But the art side is how we can inject so much of the humanity there, and the consequences of it are we have higher response rates. So it's like we have to be able to play both sides of that conversation and know what works really well and what resonates with humans, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about relating to other people.
Exactly. And it is like the nonprofit, it's such a human centered field, I would say. And a lot of times the things that people remember most about brands are not your value proposition or your clever positioning. Sometimes what they remember about a brand is something really random or funny. Like when you think of like the what's that car insurance company with the gecko?
Yeah, Geico, right?
Gecko. You remember the gecko. You remember the green color. You remember this. Why would anyone use a gecko to sell like insurance? Like it just sounds. Imagine people sitting around a table being like, "Okay, we have to use this gecko to sell our insurance." If we were doing like, if people were following their like logic, that would have never made it past the brainstorming phase. But you have to trust in these kind of meaningless or like illogical brand
Hmm.
assets, because that's sometimes what people remember the most.
Right. It's such a good point, though, because you just remembered the gecko and not remember the name of the company.
Oh my god, yeah, that's so true.
And the company is like almost 100 years old. I think they're 90-ish years old. And like that's such a
Yeah.
good example of the marketing being, or the branding being, the placeholder, the value holder for the business. And so like that's such a great use case. And for lots of reasons. So I appreciate you bringing that up and telling that. But what would you say though? I've also heard the phrase, and I love a lot, is, your brand or your marketing is what people say about you when you're not around. It's like, oh, well,
Mm,
what do you say about Geico? What do you say about Nike? What do you say about Google? What do you say about Apple? What do you say about, well, we're picking on massive brands here, right? So, I mean, we want to say the same thing about, the nonprofit space, the Charity Waters of the world and the Paces of the world and like all of these great organizations. What's your take on that, about how other people talk about your organization?
I think what people say about your organization is just as important as who you say you are. Because I
Mm.
did say, okay, the meaning of a brand is the overall I identity. of your org, but it's not just that. It's who you say you are, but it's how people perceive that identity that gives it power. Because
Mm.
it's not enough to say, okay, our brand is this, we're this, and we do this. But then if people don't perceive that, then it's useless. So it's not just about establishing your brand, for example, your values and your mission, it's about living by it.
Right.
So, for example, if you say one of the core values of your org is like is sustainability, but then in your office all you have is plastic straws, and at all your in-person galas or events everything is like paper single-use items, then you're not living by that, and your audience will think you're just a fraud, like they won't take you seriously. So I
Mm.
think again, like the Nikes and the Googles and the Apples, like say what you want about them, but their brand values, they do live by them in the products that they offer. Like for example, a strong brand, I would say Patagonia.
Right.
Sustainability is one of their core brand values, and they do live by that. So again, a brand isn't just who you say you are, it's what your audience perceives. And you've got to walk the walk if you don't want to look like an idiot.
Completely. And I think what's important for people to understand is, how is that identity enforced? It's
Mm-hmm.
usually around a table, right? It's people talking around the table, and they're saying, hey, we're going to have a gala. And somebody at the table, usually someone named Natalie Huynh, is going to say, okay, well, what are we going to use for plating? What's going to be available there? What is this going to look like? Because we say stand for sustainability, and you're trying to skimp on the budget so we can use paper and all of it. We're just using that example.
Mm-hmm.
But like the identity is withheld and empowered during these conversations. It's
Mm.
these decisions. That's when it happens. It happens around the marketing table. It happens around the executive leadership team meetings. It's like,
Yes,
are we going to
definitely.
live into this or not? And the consequences are it usually costs more, right? That's the problem.
Yep.
You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I definitely think again, all these decisions are made like usually around a table with people talking about them. But it's kind of that's why workshopping your brand, it's no small feat. It takes deep intentional effort
Right.
from people at every level of your org, because if you're going to establish like you know your mission, your values, and your theory of change, it has to be something that you can live by. And I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so it has to be something that you can practically live by, because your audience will definitely see that you're not living by that. And I think if you do put in that front-loaded effort of establishing your brand, you do not realize how much it'll make your decision making so simple down the road. Because if you are committed to who you are and you know your brand, you know your values, you know the change you want to make in the world, and you commit to that, every decision making process following that will be so easy, because you can grow and scale in a strategic way. If an opportunity comes your way, you won't have this crisis of being like, should we go for it or should we not? Because you can just be like, does it align with our brand? Does it not?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Yes, cool, let's go for it. No, move it to the side and move on. A strong brand will make your operations so much easier. I swear, if you create a strong brand and everyone at your org believes in that, your work moving forward will be so simple. You will save so much money. You will, and time. You'll be a much more, I guess, like a much more, what's that? Flexible,
Mhm.
adaptable org for
Mhm.
sure.
Yes, and you'll also, like you said, but it's such a good heuristic. It's such a good decision
Hmm.
making process, where it's like, yeah, that doesn't align with who we are, so we're not going to do it.
Exactly.
But
You can just move on.
you just move on, and but it's based on a good decision, a good reason.
Hmm.
Like that's the thing that's so important is, um, let's just come up with an example here. Let's say you're a nonprofit that wants to grow through partnerships. So you're going to partner with other organizations to expand your reach. You've got received grant money, and you're going to subgrant that out to other partners. And you're evaluating 100 applications because you have this is a very common growth pattern. So I'm just going to let everybody know, if you don't know this, it's very common for nonprofits to receive grants and then subgrant that money out. And
Hmm.
so the nonprofit that received the grant is now having to review grant applications to potential partners. And there has to be a decision making criteria. There has to be is this someone that we would partner with? Well, let's look at their vision and values. Let's look at their work. Let's look at their theory of change. Let's look at their impact. And if it doesn't line up, you pass on the organization, right? The same way that when you're in the hiring process and you meet with someone and you get a weird feeling about them, and everyone else around the table is like, I don't know if this person's a good fit. Your brand values tell you why,
Exactly.
you know? Oh, well, they spoke poorly about their former partners, or they spoke, they have a bad attitude about the nonprofit industry, or whatever the reason is. It's like, oh, yeah, you're not a good fit here. And that's okay. We're just not going to hire you. That's a really important thing.
Yeah, your brand is kind of like a like North Star kind
Right.
of. It guides you where to go, and if you trust in it, and if you base your brand obviously on something good and positive and something that you have the capacity to achieve, then you're set.
Right. Right. Natalie, this has been such a fun conversation. I love your perspective on this. You have a rich history of doing this with so many different types of businesses, and bringing it to the nonprofit sector is just such a gift. I really, really love this.
Thank you so much. I've had such a good time, nerding out about branding and nonprofit marketing. I feel like it's such a niche topic, but I feel like you could talk for ages about this thing. So I've had a really fun time, talking with you about this. You've asked like great questions, and it's been so fun to, dive deep on these topics.
Well, speaking of, I've loved every minute of it, so thank you. But speaking of people getting the chance to learn more about you and learn more about Pace, where should they go? Where are you active? Are you active on social media at all? Do you active on LinkedIn? Active on anything like that?
Yes, so I actually, this is the most ironic part is that I'm a marketer, but I don't have personal social media
Okay,
pro
that's okay.
pro profiles, mainly because I do it so much for work that I don't have the capacity to maintain it in my personal life, but I am on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Perfect. We'll definitely put that in the show notes. And then you're working with a great organization. You want to tell us a little bit about Pace?
Yes, of course. So, PACE, we're based in Los Angeles, and we're a community development non-profit that promotes economic opportunities in underserved communities across LA. So, we have five core programs that we work in: small business development, workforce development, affordable housing, and energy justice, and early childhood education. So you can
Fantastic.
learn more about our work at pacela.org. And if you'd love to connect with us, please reach out.
That's fantastic. Love that. Well, I have loved every minute of this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on marketing and branding, and how it's so important, and how people can, like, why it's so important, and how people can apply it for themselves.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. This has been so much fun.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.